Do you believe that history turns on moments? I do. And today, I want to tell you how the whole of not just Scottish, but British history would have been different, but for an evening of madness. This story is a belter. So if you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and ring the notification bell to be told when I upload new videos. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. That is Edinburgh Castle, and over there is the West Church, and all around about us are drinking establishments. I'm going to put these three things together to tell you the story of one evening that changed the course of Scottish, British and probably European history. You see, here in Scotland we get caught up in our own petty parochial interests. Now, I'm not slagging us off, that's pretty normal. Everyone in the world does that. But today, as I tell a local story, I'm going to ask you to think of the wider implications. There were three major Jacobite uprisings. One in 1689, when Dutchman William of Orange invaded and took the British thrones. One in 1715, as a response to the Hanoverian George I taking the British throne. And of course, the one that everyone talks about, when Claire Randall tore a breach in the space-time continuum in order to raise the clans for Bonnie Prince Charlie and raise her skirts for Jamie Fraser, the handsome Highlander. Not all books are as accurate as others. The point is that everyone bangs on about Bonnie Prince Charlie in 1745, but the truth is that 1715 Jacobites had wider support in Scotland, Ireland and royalist Tory parts of England. Oh, how things have changed. When Queen Anne died in 1714, she was replaced by a German who spoke no English and was 58th in line to the throne. His appointment was hugely unpopular throughout this island. There was Jacobite support for the return of the Stuarts in Oxford and in England's West Country, where potential leaders were arrested before they could get up to anything. There was an actual uprising in the north of England under the Earl of Derwentwater. Come away, the Geordies! And it goes without saying, there was a rising in the Highlands. But before the arrests in Cornwall, before the Royal Navy had geared up its coastal patrols, before Jacobite Highlanders crossed the Forth and joined up with those Jacobites in the north of England, something was happening here that would change events all over the world. Here's the plan. Arms for 10,000 men and apparently £100,000 paid to Scotland as part of a Union bribery deal was still in the castle from 8 years earlier. Now, that might be worth checking the sources, but the point is, the government used Edinburgh Castle to store their arms, ammunition and money in Scotland. Now, Jacobite leaders had recruited a couple of brothers, Dr. William Arthur and his brother Ensign Thomas Arthur. One was the King's botanist and the other a former officer of the Scots Fusilier Guards. Now, just 3 days after the Jacobites had raised their standard at Braemar, on the 9th of September, a sergeant and 2 other soldiers of the garrison up there had been bribed to get them into the castle. Around 40 Highlanders had made their way by various routes into Edinburgh. And at 9 o'clock on the appointed night, they met up in the West Kirk with another 40 men from Edinburgh itself. At 10 o'clock, they'd head up the rocks to the north side of the castle. The bribed sergeant would be on duty up there and would lower the ropes, which they would attach to grappling hooks at the end of ladders. The compromised guards would pull up the hooks, secure the ladders, and the two Arthur brothers, who knew the castle well, would climb up first and lead the group in. Once they'd taken the castle, they'd fire 3 cannon. Jacobites across in the Fife Coast would hear the signal, and a series of beacons would be lit, taking the news up to the Jacobites who were gathering in Perthshire. With supporters of King James to the north and to the south, well armed and well funded, the few government troops at Stirling who hadn't had time to get their act together would be screwed. Latent support in Scotland, which was already huge in this post-Union German imposter king environment, would coalesce around the Jacobite cause. The English support would rally, government troops in England would be stretched, and Bob's your uncle. That was the theory. However, Dr. Arthur, who was no military man and apparently a recent convert to the Jacobite cause, was noticeably nervous on the evening in question. As Mrs. said, "What's up with you?" he blurted out the plan to his wife. Never a good thing. It's particularly not a good thing if your wife is the daughter of Sir John Clark Baron of Pennycook and the sister of Sir John Clark of Pennycook Jr. and they're both prominent supporters of George I. What were you thinking about, man? She went behind her husband's back and sent an anonymous letter to the Lord Justice Clerk of Edinburgh revealing the whole conspiracy. Oh no, what was he thinking? Meanwhile, back here, the men had met up in the churchyard at 9 with some of the ladders. However, there was a guy called Charles Forbes from the Calton. Now, those familiar with Edinburgh will know Calton Cemetery along at the east end of Princes Street. In those days, the area was a separate village outside of Edinburgh's old town. The layout of the new town was still half a century in the future. Anyway, the guys in the churchyard had most of the ladders and a grappling iron, but the guy who they were waiting on had longer ladders. Of course, as they waited for the long ladder guy to arrive, Mrs. Arthur's letter had made its way to Lord Justice Clark. Once the castle had been warned, our Jacobites would climb the ladders only to walk into the arms of the waiting garrison. But the Lord Justice Clark doesn't get the letter until 10 o'clock, by which time the ladders should be resting up against the castle wall. Mrs. Arthur's snitching would be pointless. But as the Lord Justice panics, the Jacobites are arguing amongst themselves. You see, Forbes hasn't arrived with the longer ladders. What do? If they go, they don't have all the equipment. If they wait, the sentry might lose patience. Where is Forbes? I'll tell you where he is. He's in the pub. So confident is he of the success of this operation that he's decided to celebrate first. Have you ever seen one of those run-in tries? It was a foregone conclusion and the guy starts to celebrate early. If that seems like a comedy of errors, then I've got more historical comedy for you. I'm touring my new show, Scotland Made the World, in 2025 and 2026. Get your tickets right now for Perth, Western Australia, Adelaide, Melbourne, Hobart, Canberra, Sydney, Brisbane, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. You can also buy some tickets for Scottish dates and Canadian dates will follow. Click the link top right or in the description below. Or, if in doubt, go to www.brucefummey.co.uk. Okay, so Forbes is in the pub. But there was still time for the Jacobites to succeed. You see, eventually the conspirators when no news of Forbes, decided to go ahead. They scrambled up the rock until they were at the foot of the wall, where their expectations were confirmed. The ladders were 2 meters short. As they impatiently waited, across town the clerk had sent an express letter to the governor of the castle. 2 sides were about to converge on the same spot. As the short laddered Jacobites looked up, the messenger rushed across town, and the future of the British Isles hung in the balance. The messenger didn't arrive on time, but as the compromised sentries looked down, they heard the footsteps of other troops approaching. Their shift was ending, and this was the change of guard. Sergeant William Ainsley shouted down, "God damn you all! You've ruined both yourselves and me. Here comes the round. I've been telling you of this hour. I can serve you no longer." Trying to save himself as best he could, he shouted his warning to the relieving guards, "Enemy! Enemy!" It was every man for himself. The Jacobites scattered as the troops fired rounds over the wall after them. And as Jacobites scrambled or fell from the rocks with grappling irons falling on top of them and guards firing after them, a somewhat drunken Mr. Forbes wobbled along what is now Princess Street on his way from the Carlton, carrying the ladders that would have seen Jacobites occupy the prime position in Scotland before George I's government knew what was happening. If only he hadn't had that drink, the history of these islands would have been written entirely differently. If you'd like to know how things went for those Jacobites in the north of England, then one of my most popular videos is coming up on screen now. Support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member, or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, Fummey and Doch is going to be Lama Life. Cheerio and Rasta.